Okay, hello everyone. So, welcome to the first code along for Spark. So, this is a very cool moment because at this point you've been learning a few things. So, at the very start, you learned how to use Git. Uske baad, you've learned how to use Python to create APIs. And the third thing that you learned is how to use React to create web pages. And today you're going to kind of be putting it all together. So, Aj, we don't have any slides or anything. What we're going to be doing is setting and creating an app from scratch end to end. And the app that we'll be building is a blogging app. So there you'll be able to view blogs and you'll be able to create blogs. And after that, your assignment will essentially be to add more functionality. So functionality for deleting blogs and stuff like that. So yeah, basically, let's get started. At the start, let's use everything that we've learned so far. So the very first thing is Git. So whenever you're creating a new project, it's a very good idea to start a Git repo because then you can track your changes over time. You can share the code with other people very easily. You can work with other people as well. And you don't have to back up your code in different places. GitHub just backs it up on the cloud. So that's perfect. So I hope everyone can see my screen. एक thumbs up दे दो if you can see my screen. Uh, Perfect. ठीक है. So uh, I would recommend if you're on your laptops, then if you can, then try and code along with me. You don't have to do the exact same thing, but you can kind of try to do the same things that I am doing so that parallelly you also get some experience. Otherwise, the recording will be available. So what you can do is look at the recording later and try and code along if the meet is going too fast for you. Uh, so yeah, with that, let's get started. So I'm just going to go to my GitHub profile and I'm going to create a new repository. So you just go to repositories and you click on new, right? And just name it something. So I'll just name it Spark blog. Once you name it something, you can just click on create repository, right? And now you have a blank Git repository. So now you should go to your IDE of choice. Any VS Code based IDE is preferable because it makes it very easy to work with Git. I'm using Cursor. So if you guys remember in the very first session, we used Cursor and I showed you how to download it and use it and everything. And that is what I'll be using today. So in the middle, there's this clone repo button. I'll just press clone from GitHub on the top. And over there, you can see a list of all your GitHub repositories. So I'll just click on Spark blog and you should just go to any folder that you have and select it. And it will just create a copy of that GitHub repository over here. Okay, so Cursor, in case you're not familiar with Cursor's user interface, on the very left side here, I'll actually annotate on the screen. So on the very left side here, you have your files. Right now it's blank because our Git repository is completely blank. On the right side, you have an AI chat agent. This is what makes Cursor so powerful. This chat can actually read your code and interact with your code, and you can ask it questions. And if you open a file, then in the middle over here, you will see all your code. Right. So uh, that's the kind of workflow that you have in Cursor. So what you can do is right click on here and you can create new files and new folders. So the first file that you should create is called readme.md, which is basically the readme of your project. So if you distribute your code with different people or you're copying this code over and giving it to someone else, the readme file should tell them what the project is, what the technologies are, and how to run it. For now, I'll just create a heading and I'll say Spark blog and I'll say hello world. Right. Uh, you can press Control S to save. And over here, if you see my cursor, there's a get portion. And over there, you can put a commit message. So what a commit message is in Git, just as a revision, is basically telling people what changes you have made to the code in this commit. So I'll just say added readme. and then you can press the arrow and commit and push. And what commit and push does again is it will push up your changes to the Git repository. So if I open my browser again and I refresh, uh, you can see that this readme.md file has come up here, and you can see my heading and whatever I've written over there. So uh, our Git connection is working. We can work on our code and we can push features, right? So let's get started with the coding. So uh, does anyone remember the name of the library that we used in Python to make APIs? Just small, quick quizzes so that you guys stay engaged. Uh, you can write in the chat, or you can open your mic and speak as well. So we basically use Spark. We basically use Flask, and Flask is a library that lets you build APIs in Python. And again, as a kind of revision, APIs are basically what you use to interact different components of your app together. It stands for Application Programmer Interface. So basically, what we'll be doing is we'll be making a Python backend. What that backend does is it stores a list of blogs and the content, and it uh, kind of keeps track of them, and it lets you add posts and view posts through an API. And later, what we'll do is when we're creating a front end, it will hit that API, and uh, it will view the have you view the posts in a more user friendly way. So that is essentially how we do it. Usually we start creating the backend first, because backend is usually where all of your data is defined. So if you have a good idea of what your data is going to look like, then after that everything becomes kind of easy, right? So usually you start by creating the backend first. So what I'll do is I'll create a new folder here and I'll call it backend. Okay. And I'll open the folder and I'll open it in my terminal, right? If you have a Mac, you'll have a Mac terminal. If you have Linux, you'll have a terminal. And if you have Windows, you have PowerShell or CMD. Right. So you can right click and click on open in terminal on any operating system, and that will let you do stuff in the code. So again, if you have seen our Python video, then you'll know how to go through this. But as a revision, I'll kind of do it again. So what you do first is you create a virtual environment. So the way you do that is Python dash m when, and then the name of your virtual environment. I'll just name it when again. You press enter and you wait for a little bit, and it creates your virtual environment. After that, you can do source. This command will change depending on your operating system. But again, if you look at the slides, then we have all of the different commands that you will need to run. But for Linux and for Mac OS, you have to use source. So source, when, then activate. Once you do that, you've activated the virtual environment, and you can install any libraries you want. So we want to use Spark, so we want to use Flask, so we'll do pip install Flask. And it's installed everything, right? So now we can start working in Flask, right? So I'll go to my backend folder, create a new file, and I'll call it app.py. Okay. So now we know we want to create a backend, right? Uh, what you can do is you can ask AI to make it for you, but what is much more productive in the long term is you actually learn the library and you learn how to create it. And for that, instead of courses, usually the best resource is documentation. So I've opened Flask's documentation over here. If you just Google Flask documentation, you'll find this page. And over here, it's basically giving you a quick start guide on how you can start creating an API, right? So I'll just copy the example code that they've given, paste it, and ensure it works, first of all. They've also given instructions on how to run it. Uh, Flask dash dash app, the name of your file, and then run. Right. So I'll go to my terminal and let's try it out. So I'll just go to my backend folder and I'll do Flask dash dash app. and then the name of my Python file is app. So I'll do app run. And as you can see, it's saying running on this. And if you click it, then it will open the API in your browser. And as you can see, I'll zoom in a bit. As you can see, we have hello world over here. So Flask itself is working. So now let's start creating our API. So the very first thing that you do whenever you're creating an app, I'll actually increase the font size a little bit for you guys. Just wait a second. Okay, so it should be a bit easier for you guys to see now. So basically, now that we have this working, the very first thing you do in every app is define what your data is going to look like, because the data dictates what everything else will be like. So since we haven't taught databases yet, normally what you would do is you would have a database which stores all of your blogs, right? So then what happens is when you have different types of data, maybe you have a user object and you have a blog object, you can define relations between them. And what you can do is a database lets you scale to, let's say, 100, 500, 10,000 users very easily. But if you use just kind of Python itself in memory storing the data like we are now, you won't be able to scale to so many users. So this is kind of a proof of concept because you haven't learned databases yet. Uh, but it will teach you everything you need to know about kind of making an app, right? So very first thing is define data. So what we'll do is we'll define blogs is equal to, and as you can see, cursor is auto correcting it, but I want to type it myself for now. Blogs will just be a list because you can have multiple blogs. And inside that, you'll have multiple blog objects. So it'll be like blog object one, blog object two, etc. Right. You'll have different blog objects. So what do our blog objects actually look like? I'll write it over here. Blog object one. Usually you want them to be dictionaries. So blog object is just a Python dictionary. Whenever you have any kind of data, it's always a good idea to have an ID. Uh, if you're using a database or if you're not using a database, doesn't matter. You need a unique ID always, right? So let's do ID is equal to 1. After that, or ID is equal to 0, actually. Very first blog post, ID will be equal to 0. Then cursor is suggesting that we should have a title, which is absolutely right. We should have a title for a blog post. So title will be blog 1. Then you have content, and I also want an author field. So you can define any kind of data that you want over here, but I personally want an author field. So I'll just add an author field over here. So cursor is auto correcting a lot here because this is a very simple app. It knows exactly what to do, but it's a good idea to look over the code that it generates. So now I have one blog object. I have another blog objects. What blog objects look like is they have an ID, a title, an author, and a content. That's perfect. Exactly what I want. And blogs is just a list of different blog objects. So that is perfect. So now what we'll do is we'll create our API routes. So we have our hello world route here. That is perfect. So now let's go back to Flask's documentation and let's see what to do next. So if I scroll down, it will tell you there are routes which let you kind of uh, pass in variables inside the URL of the API itself. So usually what we want in a CRUD application is one endpoint to get all of the blog posts, one endpoint to get one single blog post, and we want an API endpoint to create blog posts, delete blog posts, and update blog posts. So what we'll be doing today is creating blog posts and viewing blog posts. And your assignment after today is to take this app and add the functionality of updating and deleting. It should be very easy. So that is what we're going to do. So let's create our first route, app.root slash blogs. This is the get all endpoint. So what I'll do is I'll create a function, def get blogs, and it will return this blogs object. So I've created another route. Uh, so what I'll do is I'll restart the Flask server and let's see if this route works. So I'll open a new tab. I'll go to localhost slash dash 5000. As you can see, hello world as we had before. But now I'll go to slash blogs. And if I go to slash blogs, as you can see, it's giving me uh, all of the data of the blogs that I have inside my Python. So this is pretty cool. This will let you kind of transfer data between your Python application and whatever front end you use. So let's keep going. Now, what we'll do is app.root. And as you can see, cursor knows exactly what to do. But again, let's look at the code. You go to blogs and you take a parameter, which is the ID of the blog that you want. And then you create a function which will return that given blog. So this code is now slightly wrong. Can anyone tell me why this code is wrong? I'll remove this. So can anyone tell me why this code is wrong? So right now it will be correct, but the problem that will arise over here is, let's say you have a bunch of blogs, blog 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you delete blog 3 and blog 4 later. So then inside Python, you'll have blog 0, blog 1, and then blog 5. So what we actually need to do is we need to look through all of the blogs inside this list, and we need to find the one which has that correct ID, right? So what we should do is, this is just basic Python for blog and blogs. If blog ID is equal to blog ID, it will return that given blog. Otherwise, it will say blog is not found. So this makes sense, right? So let's try out this endpoint as well. Uh, let's restart the Flask server again, and let's go to the endpoint we created, which is slash blog slash number, right? So slash blog slash 0. So this is right. This is giving me the content of the blog which has ID 0. This will give the ID 1. And if I do ID 100, you just say blog not found. So that is perfect. That is exactly what we want. After this, we just want to create a final route which will let us create a blog. So I'll just do app.root and I'll name it create blogs. Create blog. All right. So what this create blog will do is it will take the request. In Flask, whenever you get a request inside this function, you can do request.json to get all of the data. Once you do this new blog, you append this new blog and you return new blog comma 201. So this is not exactly correct, because usually what happens is the ID is controlled by the backend. You don't want users to just put any kind of ID from the front end. In fact, you don't want users to put in an ID at all. What you want users to do is uh, put in the content of the blog itself, and you let the backend figure out the ID. So what we should do is we should create a max ID equal to, and then because we already have two blogs, let's make it 2. And then what we'll do is, once we get a blog from the user, we add this max ID, and then you do max ID plus equal to 1. So what that will do is it will basically let you create blogs, and then when you create a blog, the backend will figure out the ID all by itself. So up till now, we've been just using the browser to test our APIs, but in the browser, we can directly make post requests, but it's a bit difficult. So the way you can make post requests is, I'll restart the server. The way you can make post requests is through the command line using a tool called curl. Curl is just a tool which will let you make requests to different websites, and you can create post requests through it. So once again, I have a website here uh, which gives you the syntax of how you can use curl to uh, make different kind of requests, right? So what I'll do is I'll first go to my browser, right? Okay. I'll go to my browser. I'll look at all of the blogs. So as you can see, I have two blogs right now. So what I'll then do is I'll go here, I'll do curl, and then let's look at the syntax. So for curl, what you want to do, if it's a post request, the very first thing you want to do is content type application JSON. Once you do that, you want to give the actual content in JSON format. So let's put that. And I don't want to give an ID. What I want to give is an author, a title, and a content, right? So I'll give author, new. The title is going to be, let's say, foo. And uh, the third thing that we had is content. So now what we'll do is we'll just add content bar, right? So we've passed in the content. Then we just say that there's a post request by doing -x post. So I'll paste that in as well. And then you give in your URL. So our URL is http localhost 5000 slash, and the name of our endpoint is create blog. So I'll go to create blog. I'll press enter. Okay, and now it's giving me a 500 internal server error. So this is our first kind of debugging challenge. Uh, 500 internal server essentially means that your Python code while running, it's encountered an error somewhere, right? So then what we can do is we can go to where our server is running and it will give you a log of what went wrong. So over here, what you can see is request is not defined. So this is a Flask problem because Flask should ideally be giving us requests, right? So let's go to the Flask documentation again, right? And then let's look at where it's using post requests, right? So methods get post, right? So this is what you can use to enable post requests. We have our post over here, so that is clearly not an issue, right? So let's scroll down again and let's see what happens. Accessing request data. This is exactly what we want. So now what we can do is scroll down and see an example. So def login, if request.method equal to post, request.form username, right? So basically request.form is another way of passing in attributes, but we want to use request.body. So what we should do is we should start Googling now uh, how to access request in Flask. Right. So it looks like what we need is request.getJSON. And also we need to import request from Flask up here. So there's two errors over here. So let's import request as well. And it seems to work. Let's try it out. Let's see what happens. So I'll do this. I'll rerun the curl command. It's still giving me an internal server error. So let's go back to here and let's see what happens. Cannot access local variable max ID. So this is just a Python thing because max ID is a global variable. Uh, we basically want to access it inside here. So we should probably write global max ID. Uh, once that is done, uh, let's restart the server again and try again. Now we're not getting an error anymore. And you can see here that we've given a 201, which is a successful request. So let's go back to our uh, here and let's do it. And as you can see, I have another field here and we have a new ID as well. So basically, you can see how easy it is in Flask to create a working API, right? We've created a create and read API. And update and delete is equally easy as well. It's just Python code. So now that our backend is done, now is a good time to commit on Git. So I'll just write made backend and commit. All right. So basically, uh, this is how you create a backend broadly. uh, Backends can do crazy stuff. So you can have machine learning models that are giving you a response on your backend. You can have AI stuff happening. You can have large databases. This is just the very basic thing, but I'm sure you can see with how many different libraries Python has and how many different functionalities it has. And this is just a Python function, so you can literally write any code here and you can kind of do any processing you want in backends, right? So this concludes like the backend portion. Our backend's finished and it's running. Now let's start with our front end. So I'm going to create a new folder called front end. And front ends, when you create them nowadays, basically what you do is you use a router and a runtime, which basically makes it much easier for you to write apps in React. Uh, Router and runtime basically come combined uh, in a package uh, in what is called a React runtime. And there are a few popular ones. So the most popular ones are Vite, Next.js, Create React App, for example. Uh, and all of these run on top of Node.js. So you can use them to create any kind of front end you want. On top of this, you also have things called uh, component libraries and UI libraries. So what these do is instead of you having to write the bare HTML code and the CSS code yourself, you can get pre-built components where most of the things are already good enough. Uh, and when you create an app, usually that is exactly what you want to use. So let's just kind of find a good component library and let's start using it. So you can Google what the best component libraries are. There are many popular ones. Some of them are Chakra UI, Material UI. There's Tailwind CSS, right? And the most popular one right now, very popular, is one called Shad CN UI, and it's popular because it's quite easy to use. So again, as I said, you can use AI to do this, but I would prefer to read the documentation because it gives you a better understanding, right? So here I am on the SHADC and UI documentation, and on the left there is an installation, and as you can see, there's different runtimes that you can install it for. You can even install it for Laravel, which is not even a React runtime; it's a PHP runtime. There's React Router, there's Remix and Astro, both of which are built on React, and Next.js, which is one of the most popular React runtimes. Today, I'm going to be using Next.js because it's super popular. You should learn it. Most apps are using it nowadays. And ShadCN integrates very easily with it. So installing ShadCN with Next.js is super simple. So I go to Next.js, and over here, you've just been given commands. And if you run these commands, you can initialize projects very easily. So I'll just copy this command. I'll go to my terminal again. Right. I'll create a new terminal. I'll go to my front end folder and I'll paste in that command. So what this does is this creates a new project with ShadCN already installed, which is very good. So I'll just press enter. Uh, I'll write I'll write the name of the app as blog app. You can name it anything. And then once you wait a few minutes, what it will do is it will download everything that it needs. It will install everything that it needs so that it can initialize a front end project with ShadCN already installed. So yeah, this is fairly standard. While that happens, I'll show you a few of the features of ShadCN. So the way ShadCN works is you add components like buttons. So instead of having to create a button and style it yourself, you get a pre-styled button which is already responsive. So your website will work on mobile and it looks good as well. Uh, so what you do is you add components like buttons using this command, and then you can just import it inside your app and you can use it in this way. Super simple. So that is exactly what we'll be doing. It's still creating the project, so it might take a couple of minutes. Uh, so yeah, and over on the left, you can basically see all of the different components that you get. So, for example, I can click on button, and it will kind of tell you the different parameters you can have. So you can style the button yourself. Uh, there's this card which creates a card like this. So there are many different things you can do in ShardCN. I'm actually not sure why it's taking so long to create an XJS project, but let's just wait a little bit for it. Keep it open right here. So basically, what we're going to be doing is at the home page, we want to display all of the different blocks that are in the backend, right? So let's kind of find a good component to do that. Uh, so I'm going to scroll. I think the card itself should be pretty good for that. So what a card does is basically you can create a card and then you can put anything inside it, any kind of headers, footers, right? So what I'll be doing is basically just the title of the blog post and the author of the blog post here. I'll be creating a card and that will go to a page which shows the blog post, right? The next component that we need is some kind of form. So over here, you can see a form component. So now it's saying this form component uses React hook form and Zord. These are two different libraries. Zord is used for validating the data that comes into the form, and React hooks makes it super easy to integrate forms with React. Today, we're not going to be using any of that because it's kind of a different library that you have to learn. So we'll just be using plain simple forms. So for that, I think what would be perfect is a dialog. So what a dialog does is it kind of gives you a pop-up component like this. So I think what should happen is we should have a pop-up which gives you different fields to fill up, like the author name, the title, and the description of the blog post. And then you can click on this button and it will hit that API and it will create a blog post. So I think that is a perfect kind of set of components that we can use. Right. It just finished creating it. It will also ask you some questions about uh, your color schemes. I would say just go with the defaults always because the defaults are quite good. So the project's been created. So now what we can do is we'll go back to cursor, right? Open our terminal, go inside the blog app folder, and you just run npm install. This will install all the different libraries that ShardCN needs. It should do this while installing, but just in case, you should run npm install anyway. Now that you've run npm install, we can start creating our app, right? So the way you run a front-end app is using npm run dev. So what npm run dev is basically npm run is just a prefabricated command which lets you run commands, and dev just means you want to start the server in development mode. So in development mode, you have a couple of good features. Whenever you change any code inside cursor, it will automatically reflect, so you don't need to keep restarting it. And there's a couple of other things as well. So you can click on npm run dev. As you can see, it's running on localhost 3000. If I click on it, it'll open in my browser. And this is the default page that you get whenever you create an XJS project. So we've successfully started creating a front end. Next thing, let's go into cursor. And in Next.js, all of your project files are inside app. So inside the app folder, you can go to page.tsx, right? So page.tsx is basically every single page in your application. Their React components will live inside page.tsx. And what you can do is you can create a folder inside app. I'll just call it hello, right? And you can create a page.tsx inside hello. And over here, I'll just edit the code. So I'll remove all of the kind of prefabricated things that are there with Next.js, uh, like right here. And I'll remove the footer as well. And over here, I'll just write a heading. which says hello world. So this is just HTML that I'm writing right now, plain HTML. So now if you go to browser, remember that I was talking to you about routers. So Next.js does routing for you. So all I did was I created a folder called hello and I created a new page inside that. So what that does is now if I go to slash hello and I press enter, it'll show me hello world. So basically it handles all of the different routing and the different pages inside your app for you. You just have to create the correct folder structure. So let's get started. Uh, let's go to the main page.tsx and let's remove everything over here. I'll remove the footer. I'll keep the main element. All right. So now let's start the project. So the very first thing I want is a header. And inside the header, I'll write blog app. And within this header, what you can do is, uh, because ShadCN uses Tailwind CSS, you can read Tailwind CSS's documentation. The way it basically works is you can add class names to anything, right? And these class names will help you style it. So I can write text 4XL, it will make the text bigger. I can write font bold, it will make the font bold. So you don't actually have to write any CSS yourself. You can just put things inside class name and it will do it for you. So it's super handy. Once I do that, as you can see, blog app shows up over here. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to create a bunch of cards. So how do I do that? So basically, this is where React comes in. What you want to do with React is you want to kind of keep updating the blogs, right? So in React, there is a construct called useState. And what that lets you do is if you want some JavaScript function that you want to run whenever the page is loaded. So whenever someone visits your blog app, what you can do is you can use useState. Then what we'll do is within that use state, you can hit the API that we've already created. We can get all the blog posts. Once we get all the blog posts, we can just list them inside our function. So super simple. So what we'll do is I'll import use state from React. As you can see, cursor already knows what to do. And then what we should do is inside this function, we should define something called a state variable. So a state variable is just a variable in React that will store uh, anything that you want to display, and it will update everything that is corresponding to it automatically. So the way you initialize one is this: const blogs set blogs is equal to use state. Blogs is the name of our variable, and set blogs is a function that we use to update this variable. And then, as you can see, cursor already knows what to do. So basically how you do API calls usually is you create use effect, and then inside your use effect, you just create a fetch. A fetch is just a built-in JavaScript function that lets you hit those APIs. Once you do that, you get the response and the JSON of the response. And once you get that data, you set this blogs to that data. Now for debugging, what I'll do is I'll just do console.log in use effect. And I'll also do console.log data. Actually blogs, right? So basically what should happen now is you're importing a component that needs, all right, so this is again our first debugging challenge in front end. uh, the good thing about Next.js is it gives you pretty good error messages, so usually you can figure out exactly what to do. So what it's saying is you're importing a component that needs use state, which works only in a client component. To fix, mark the file with the use client directive. So and it also gives you a link in the documentation that tells you what use client is. Basically, whenever you're using any React, you have to put in use client at the top like this. It's just an Next.js thing, very small thing, and you'll probably learn it and get over it the first time you use Next.js. Once you do that, as you can see, the app is running already. The way you can view the console in JavaScript is you can right click, press inspect, and over here you can see console, right? So this is all a bunch of Next.js things, but basically we want to look for the print statements that we put. So over here you can see in use effect, and then there's an array of length 0, right? So our array shouldn't be of length 0. It should actually have uh, length of 3 or something, right? However many blocks we add. So if you look at the log just below that, it will actually tell you what is going wrong. It's saying access to fetch this has been blocked by CORS policy. So CORS is basically for security purposes. Usually what happens is your backend is opaque and it doesn't let you access it from other websites. But we want our front end to access our backend. So the way we do that is we set something called a CORS header in our backend, which says, hey, this front end is allowed to access my backend. And this is a backend thing, so we'll have to edit Flask for that. So again, let's look at Flask documentation. Flask CORS. I'll just search that. You can look at Stack Overflow. Again, I could do this much faster if I was just using AI, but if you do that, then you usually won't understand the code that is happening. So yeah, this is an answer which says you should install this library called Flask CORS, and then uh, you can just do this, right? So that is exactly what I'll do. It says pip install Flask CORS. I'll go to my terminal where my Flask is running. Pip install Flask CORS. Once I've done that, I'll go to cursor. I'll go back to my backend, and over here, I'll just look at what they've done. So from Flask CORS, you can do this. You can import it. Once you've imported it, this is how you allow CORS for all domains on route. So that basically means uh, it's telling your backend that, hey, any kind of request that comes from any other domain, just allow it. Usually you don't want to do this because it's kind of insecure, but it should be fine for just a test application. So we can just do this. And once that's done that, you can do this, right? And on top of all of your routes, you have to put add cross origin. So I'll just do that over here. I'll do add cross origin, cross origin, cross origin, and cross origin. And I'll once again restart the Flask server. I'll find, yes. Now that I've started the Flask server, this should work. So let's refresh this page. And as you can see, in use effect, and we're still getting an array of length 0. So again, let's debug what's happened. So Flask is saying get slash blogs has worked perfectly. So from the backend side, nothing's wrong. So it must be something in our front end. So let's go back to our page. HTTP localhost 5000 blogs. If I hit this from the front end, then you can see this is working perfectly, right? Then we have a response. Now, this response.json, I'm not too sure about. I don't think the response is coming in as a JSON. So what I'll do is I'll just do console.log response and let's see what happens. So let's restart this. As you can see, uh, this is giving me a response with headers. And inside the response, so this is just a JavaScript object and you can see kind of all of the different data that you can access. So if I go inside JSON, it's saying the length is 0. But if I go inside text, that's also 0. So basically, our backend isn't returning uh, uh, the values correctly. So what do we do here? Well, up here, what you can see is the response type is CORS, right? So basically, uh, this is probably why we're not actually uh, getting our readable stream over here, right? So what we should do is basically Google and see what we can fix over here. So I'll just Google what error I'm getting. Fetch does not get body pause. Okay. So basically, what is happening over here is we're not handling our body correctly in our front end. That's what's happening. So basically, this is the entire object of the response that comes in from our API. This is this is a lot to read through. You probably can read through it and see what is going wrong. But in cases like this, usually an easier thing to do is to uh, kind of tell the AI to fix it, and then also tell the AI to explain how it has fixed it. So this is where cursor really comes in clutch. It will help you kind of debug obscure things like this. So in my front end, the blocks stays empty even after fetch y. Okay. Right. So I've given the API something to fix, the AI something to fix. Until it tries to fix it, let's see if we can't try and fix it ourselves. So text is of length 0, right? JSON is of length 0, form data is of length 0, blob is of length 0. So basically kind of uh, all of these different things that are coming in are all of length 0. So let's see if AI has fixed it. So it seems to have fixed it. So what it's doing is taking the response, taking the response.json, and then fetching the data, right? So basically, the problem is probably with our JSON that we were doing before, the syntax, right? So uh, AI has fixed it for us, and here is an explanation of why it's fixed, right? And it's actually also added code to display the blocks for us. So this is what I was going to do next. But since it's written it, I'll just explain the code to you. What it does is it checks if the bloc's length is greater than 0. Again, this is all JavaScript, so if you're a bit lost here, that is fine, but this is just basic JavaScript syntax. Uh, Once that is done, then for every blog inside those blogs, it will create a card and it will show that blog, right? So let's go here. Blog 1, this is the content of blog 1. Blog 2, this is the content of blog 2. So our data is coming in. And if you look in our console log, then you can see that our 2 blog posts have come in as well from the API. So that is perfect. The only difference is I don't want the content to show up here. I actually want the author's name to show up here. So you can do that super easily in JavaScript. You can just do blog dot whatever you want to access. So I can just do blog dot author. And as you can see now, it's the author's name that is coming in. But the thing is, these cards are static right now. They're not actually doing anything. So what we should do is kind of make them clickable. So basically, the way you do that is wrap it in an A tag, which is just the HTML for links. And once you wrap it in an A tag, you can see it's going to slash blog ID. So that is perfect. So let's try this out now. We have 2 cards. If I press on the first one, it's going to slash blog slash 0, which is perfect. Right now, it's saying page can't be found because I haven't created that page yet. Uh, so the next thing we should do is probably create that page. So I'll just create a new folder called blog. And now here is the cool thing about routers in Next.js. What you can do is, because slash blog slash integer can be any integer, what you can do is create something called a dynamic route, which is basically slash blog slash anything goes to this page. And then whatever JavaScript code you write in that page can actually read which integer it was. So using that, what you can do is basically uh, kind of create a dynamic page where depending on this blog ID that you put in, you will get a different blog, which is exactly what we want, right? So over here, it's 10 p.m. already, and we only had an hour for this, so I'll rush a little bit at the end. So now the very last thing that we should do is create that dynamic route. So I'll just ask AI to do it, and then I'll ask it to explain it. I'll tell it to create a route slash blog slash ID that displays the blog with the given ID. Super simple. So I'll wait for that to generate. Right. And once it generates, what you should see is it will create this dynamic route for us and it will display all of the blog information on this page. So yeah, it's generating that page right now. All right. So as you can see, inside blog, there's a folder called ID in square brackets. So that is how you specify a dynamic route in Next.js. You use square brackets. And once you do that, inside this, what you can do is inside your function, basically grab the blog ID. And the way you do that is using params dot whatever the name of that square bracket integer was. So you can do that, use it as a blog ID. Then you can use the API we created earlier to get the information for that blog. And then at the very end, you can just display all the blog content. So this looks okay. Let's refresh this page. Okay, it should be blogs instead of blog actually. Blogs. Once that's done, you can refresh. And as you can see, it's giving me the title of the blog, the author, and then the content as well. And there's a link which goes back to all blogs. Right now, that link isn't working. So the AI did something wrong. So it's using a link. I'll just use an A and it should go to slash, which is basically the root page that we created earlier. So now if I click on it, it will go back to the root page. It's taking a bit of time to load, but it's basically redirected back to the root page. You can see it's loading. So far we've created a way to display a single blog and a way to display all the blogs. Now the very last thing that we should do is create a form that enables us to create blog posts. So that also I can ask AI to do and it will do it much faster. So I'll ask it, I'll say create a form to create blog posts based on the API. I'll just refresh this once so that it works. Sometimes you have to restart Next.js because it crashes a little bit, but it should be fine now. Yeah. All right. So it's now creating a form. Okay. Uh, Perfect. So what it has done is basically in our page over here, it's created a new button which says create new blog and it goes to slash create. And then for that, it's created a create folder over here. And inside this create folder, what you basically have is a form, right? And again, if you've attended our React class before, uh, basically what we're doing is for each form element, we're setting the value to be a React state variable. Once we've done that, the button calls a function in JavaScript. And what that function does is it just takes all of our React variables, packages it up into an element, and then it hits the API that we created earlier in order to create our blog post. I've noticed that AI has put the wrong URL here, so I'll just do create underscore blog instead. And let's see what happens. So now I have a blog app. I have two blogs. I'll click on create new blog. Right. I'll new blog ABC. And this is new content. I click on create blog. And once it's done, as you can see on our homepage, we have a new blog. I can click on it. Okay, so it's redirecting me to slash blog again. So I'll need to rename this folder to blog instead. All right, let's try that again. So now I have my three blogs. I'll click on new blog ABC. This is a blog, right? I can click on blog 2, right? And if you can kind of code along and follow this, and you can create functionality to delete blogs and to update blogs, then I would say you basically understood most of web development, right? You can hit APIs, create APIs. You can use a library like ShadCN and Next.js in order to create beautiful front ends, and you can interface them with backend, right? So the sky is the limit now. So basically, what you can do now is inside of Next.js or inside of Python, learn all the libraries and basically create an API that lets you use ML models. And then you can create a front end which, for example, uses a React library to display a graph, right? It's not difficult to read documentation and kind of figure out how to use a React graph library. And once you do that, then you can basically kind of you understand the structure of most web applications and you understand how to do them. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this first code along. It's just a revision of everything we've done before this. Uh, in the upcoming weeks, we have some very cool sessions on things like databases and kind of how to make your apps more production ready. And after that, we have a completely new series on machine learning and AI apps, which is extremely interesting, extremely fun, and very intuitive as well. So, very interesting stuff. I hope you'll be joining us. So, thank you everyone for attending. I'll see you in the next session. Okay. Bye bye. Thank you.